If you want to understand politics, don't start with the news. Instead, start with South Park. Because lately, South Park has nailed politics. This season alone, we've had ChatGPT sucking up to everyone. We've had rampant corruption, tech billionaires invading your privacy to fight the Antichrist, Donald Trump's small penis, a Jeffrey Epstein seance, and Satan's butt baby. Yes, you heard that right. And somehow, that feels less insane than watching the actual news. Because politics, I think we can all agree, is both incredibly important and incredibly stupid. Karl Marx once said that history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. Well, South Park lives in the stage after that, where history and politics have repeated themselves so many times that they've tipped into pure absurdity. And in 2025, the show hasn't just mocked politics. It has philosophically and surgically dissected the world we live in and the forces driving it into a tailspin, revealing a world where truth is optional, where power is grotesque, and where laughter might just be our last defense. I think it's also captured something essential about right now, that we're not living through a political crisis. We are living through a reality crisis. And I think that's giving a lot of us an existential crisis. So whether you love or loathe the most absurd show on television, this year I think it's doing something important. Something that I'm going to argue deserves your attention. Because South Park has found a way to fart truth to power. And here's what should really terrify you about that. South Park might be showing us the only way out. Yes, today we're diving into the philosophical depths of a show that refuses to take anything seriously, and why that might just make it the most philosophically serious and politically effective show on television. We'll look at what South Park diagnosed about our political moment. We'll look at how these court jesters have ancient and medieval roots, why their diagnoses might also be a part of the disease, and whether laughing at everything is giving up or the first step to fighting back. And hopefully we'll have a few laughs at the expense of the rich and powerful along the way. Welcome to the first episode of Philosophical TV Club. Now, it may have been a while since you caught up with South Park. Believe it or not, the show's been on TV for 27 years now, and it's still going strong. Personally, I can remember huddling with my friends around our school's clunky old computer and slowly downloading the first episode by dial-up, which for you kids out there is, doesn't matter. The video was the size of a postage stamp, and it had the resolution of an old Game Boy, but it was something forbidden and crass, and honestly, I think funny. There was nothing like it on television. Now, things are different. South Park's creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, are part of the Hollywood establishment with a string of lucrative hits to their name. They were paid an estimated $3 billion by Paramount for the rights to the show. That's kind of like perpetual holiday at White Lotus kind of money. Maybe don't get on any strange boats, though. So they sold out and happily retired, right? Not so much. Because the context to all of this is, well, everything that's going on right now, including, and sorry, but we are going to have to talk about this, the Trump administration. You see, old media is dying. And one of the ways our captains of industry have decided to combat this is by merging it into ever larger companies. It doesn't actually save the companies. They're still performing terribly. It's almost like they don't understand their audiences. But it does look good on paper. It temporarily makes shareholders happy by inflating their value, and it delivers executives huge bonuses. So Paramount merged with Skydance to make a giant media company, which is a problem because democracies don't generally like a few companies controlling the entirety of the media. So Paramount needed approval to sell and merge from, you guessed it, the Trump administration. And it paid Donald Trump $16 million to do so. There's more details to it, including a ridiculous lawsuit, but it doesn't really add anything. They basically paid off Trump personally. There's not really much more to it. And Parker and Stone's South Park, I think, kind of took objection to this. And having been just promised $3 billion over 10 years by their new corporate parent, they've used this as an opportunity to infuriate and ruthlessly mock the Trump administration every moment since. Paramount must be thrilled. And that's the corrupt corporate context to what, in 2025, has really been South Park's single-handed crusade against politics. And I get that it's US politics, sure it is, but we'll discuss that because of the nature of geopolitical power in the world as it currently is, and because of the nature of the internet as it is now, and basically the way the English-speaking culture has become globalised, it kind of feels like we all live in the United States now, even though lots of us don't. And yet, the news and the TV and the culture that I consume every day is kind of 60 to 70% of and from the United States. Now, it helps that I love the United States and have always been fascinated by it, but I think something like this is a case for a lot of us. I mean, where would we be without The Simpsons or The Sopranos or Breaking Bad or Severance or Game of Thrones? Man, it's all just about dysfunctional families, isn't it? US culture has basically become a kind of global culture, which, as we're seeing, is not necessarily a good thing, The Sopranos aside. And part of the reason for this is because the internet has become global culture. It has gone from a place we visit to a place we live in. And in the Anglosphere at least, and yes, I'm very conscious that this is an exclusive and not necessarily the largest space, but that's because the platforms that now increasingly make up the internet are US companies and are culturally American. So that's the context to South Park's latest season. Corporate money and desperation and the never-ending dumpster fire that is the United States and its politics, and the internet as a place where we kind of all live now. And for me, the first thing that South Park nails about all these things is that they aren't separate things. In a big interview with the New York Times, Parker and Stone said that, quote, "It's not that we all got political," Mr. Parker said in an interview, "it's that politics became pop culture. On top of that, they sensed a fear of speaking out against the administration and that new taboos had emerged," Mr. Stone said. "Trey and I are attracted to that like flies to honey," Mr. Stone said. "Oh, that's where taboo is? Over there? Okay, then we're over there." We'll get to those taboos in a second, but Parker and Stone in the interview offer a pretty cutting critique of where we are right now, because we're human beings who love what we love, and when we get home from a crappy day at work, we want to watch our favourite shows, or a YouTube video from our favourite philosopher, like, hype and subscribe, or whatever. But our pop culture, our harmless escapes, have become saturated with politics. As Parker and Stone point out, politics became pop culture. Here's an example for you. I love watches. They're stupid and they're obsolete, and they're basically bits of jewellery now. I watch videos and channels like Andrew Morgan and Teddy Baldassar, and I watch Marshall restore beautiful old watches on Wristwatch Revival. It's my happy place. I use it to escape stuff like politics in the evenings. But then Trump releases a damned Trump watch that's like gold with a tourbillon and hideous and probably made in China and probably terrible. And that space kind of gets invaded. And then there's all of these tariffs on Swiss watches and all the problems about that, and the YouTubers are talking about that, and suddenly I'm like one of the kids in South Park who's complaining that
South Park sucks now? Yeah, everyone knows it. South Park sucks now. And it's because of all this political shit.
It's everywhere, even in my watch channels. And yes, politics has always been a significant part of pop culture, but now it feels like it's colonized every corner of it. There's no escape. And politics is also downstream of culture, as pundits are fond of saying. And for those of us living outside the US, this has been weirdly true. Because I may live in Australia, but I also live in the internet. And politicians in Australian politics, as well as in the UK and Canada and elsewhere, have been increasingly adopting US political tactics and taking stuff from online and migrating it into the bloodstream of our politics. In fact, the political consulting class travel from coast to coast, from country to country, migrating all of these political tactics from one polity to the next. And that means this is in addition to like hyperpartisanship and polarization that goes along with all of this. But even if they didn't, as I mentioned, we all live in the internet now. So I suspect the virus kind of would have traveled that way anyway, which is long context to say that culture, politics, the internet, and the money and infrastructure that fuels all of it are now all kind of smushed together. And South Park gets this. In the good old days, in early South Park, the internet was treated as kind of like a weird swamp that the boys could visit. It had World of Warcraft raids, it had trolls on message boards, it had the weirdest corners of humanity. But it was a silly place that they could visit and then leave. Everyone went home to their offline towns with their offline problems. Now that distinction has collapsed. And South Park has been brilliant in cataloguing all of the different points of that collapse. The show doesn't treat online as a place anymore, but as the atmosphere that we're all drowning in, where everyone feels like they're living inside one long, cursed Facebook feed. Sorry, I mean YouTube. You get it. So given that context, let's ask, what kinds of craziness has South Park been documenting this year, and what critical role have Parker and Stone been playing in cataloguing it? Well, it's been a crazy season, but I'll give summarising it a shot. So, in the first episode of Season 27, Sermon on the Mount, Eric Cartman is predictably furious, but for an unexpected reason. The president has cancelled his favourite radio station, National Public Radio.
What's NPR?
What's NPR? The funniest show ever where all the lesbians and Jews complain about stuff? I mean, who the hell does this president think he is? The government can't cancel a show. I mean, what show are they going to cancel next?
Cartman is terrified that the thing he finally wished for all of these years has actually come to pass, that woke is finally truly dead. His worst fears are confirmed when it turns out that PC Principle isn't woke anymore, but now a power Christian principle, following culture and politics to wherever it drifts next. He invites Jesus to an assembly to make the school properly Christian, like President Trump wants, with predictably poor results. And the residents of South Park are not having this. Some of them voted for Trump, sure, but there are still some sacred cows that they won't slaughter, like the separation of church and state. So they protest, and at a climactic rally, Jesus sails in to save them with the wisdom he's famous for.
You guys gotta stop being stupid.
We can't understand you.
Just shut up or we're going to get canceled, you idiots.
And the denizens of South Park, realising that Trump will surely sue them for billions of dollars, immediately capitulate, paying him $3.5 million and agreeing to run ads on how great the president is, which, well, I'll let you Google them for yourself. Oh, and Trump is sleeping with Satan and has a tiny penis. But let's focus on the genius of the inversion being played out here, because the way Parker and Stone convey the transformation of the culture, as well as the little collaborators who will immediately go along with it, like PC Principle, is through the eternal victimhood of Eric Cartman. Because he is, as the US president has often said, so sick of winning. He's living in a culture where everything he has professed to want has come absolutely true. And it's horrible. So much so, in fact, that he tries to commit suicide, dragging poor Butters along with him into the Stotch's family-sized car.
Boy, this sure is taking a long time.
Poor Butters, he's my favourite. Neither of them realising
It's not a bad thing to care a little for the environment. The Stotch family is proud to say that we own an electric car.
And sure, there's the thrill here of Parker and Stone biting the hand that feeds them, as well as inviting a lawsuit from the very president that Paramount has just paid off. But the point, I think, that they're trying to make here is that there's just no avoiding it. South Park has tried to stay away from politics before, you know, picking on poor Mr. Garrison as a Trump substitute to lob a few half-hearted throws. But it didn't quite work either way. It was the worst of both worlds because it wasn't sharp enough for those who were interested in the politics, and it was ambiguously political enough to turn off those who weren't interested. So this time, they kind of went straight at it, directly showing members of the Trump administration as themselves and their hangers-on rather than trying to dance around it. And it works. Because all of this is already in the online culture. The loudest outrages and the constant grievances are now just something we absorb by osmosis, whether we like it or not. And the other episodes of this year each explore an aspect of this. For example, the second episode, Got a Nut, takes a page out of Hannah Arendt's study of totalitarianism and the banality of evil, when it follows poor Mr. Mackey, the fired school counsellor who joins ICE just to make his nut and get paid. An amount, amusingly, that keeps just going up because of the cost of living. The very problem that it seems like has created all of this, and yet nobody is trying to solve. The message from this episode is achingly clear. Mackey is being told, and temporarily believes, that this is just the world we live in. And you either make your nut and survive, or you starve. So just put your head down and do what you have to do while ignoring the consequences to others. It also has a great running bit about how Kirsty Gnome's face is constantly trying to escape.
Because I'm a lady with good looks that drives me wild.
But the question is this inevitably the world we live in? Or has it just been made this way for the benefit of a certain few. Mackie makes his choice at the end of the episode, rescuing poor Clyde in the process because he knows that being a school counsellor and helping is what he is. Or take a look at the episode Sycophancy, which follows fan favourite Randy Marsh as he tries to rescue his failing marijuana farm and business. This is, of course, after ICE has abducted all of his workers. So he turns to ChatGPT, who thinks his every idea is great, is genius, no matter how stupid they are. And it mirrors the tech giants, the CEOs, and the world leaders that are lining up in other parts of the episode at the White House to give the president gifts and tell him he doesn't have a tiny penis. Again, sycophancy is just the coin of the realm, and what are we going to do about it? Even tech giants have to live in the world as it is today and make their nut. Then there's another episode on the Labubu craze that migrates from TikTok to middle schoolers and ends in a satanic ritual where Satan reveals that he's pregnant with Trump's butt baby. Or conflict of interest, where everyone is betting on the stupidest of things.
Will there be a snow day this month? Will Kyle's mom strike Gaza and destroy a Palestinian hospital? Will school lunch have tater tots next week?
Wait, what was that?
As well as the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, who's having a series of unfortunate accidents while trying to suppress free speech. And JD Vance is there too, revealing he's not too happy that there might be a little antichrist on the way that'll usurp his little heir apparent position as well. We also get an episode on how certain politically malleable Christians don't seem so Christian these days, with an understandable response from Jesus himself.
Look, I don't know what you think Christianity is, but it has nothing to do with that. I'm saying that you and a lot of other people seem to have a very warped sense of what Christianity is.
Are you questioning my faith?
You need a way to bully people, and you're using the Bible to do it.
And we also get to one of my favourite episodes, one dealing with Trump demolishing the East Wing and releasing an evil spirit that haunts him. Spoiler alert, it's his wife. Finally, we get Butters unintentionally igniting an AI deepfake war and distracting the boomer-staffed South Park Police Department with a fictional pedophile ring they think is real. And throughout the whole season, we have one of my favourite running gags, with a musical sting to boot, which I always love, of Peter Thiel, who knows about the Antichrist.
Peter Thiel knows about the Antichrist. Peter Thiel knows about the Antichrist.
I'm Peter Thiel and I know about the Antichrist.
So, that's a whole lot, and I think you'd be forgiven for getting a little lost in the weeds and the absurdity, but that's kind of the point. And what is South Park actually diagnosing here? Well, I've already argued that they're pointing out the unavoidable blurring together of culture, politics, and the internet. It's kind of like when you're bored in art class and you mix all of the paint colours together and all you get is an unappetizing, brown colour. That is part of the diagnosis here. Mix all of these things together with a dash of politics and outrage, and you basically get brain rot. But the stupidity of the brain rot also migrates backwards, from brain rot into culture and then into politics itself. And we'll talk a little bit later about how this might be the perfect tactic for a certain sort of grifter or con man. But the diagnosis is just the price of entry. Because South Park is also forwarding a critique of power in its most basic form. If we look at The Woman in the Hat, for example, everything that is going on is weird. Stan even called it out in an earlier episode.
Dude, what's going on? Like, none of this seems normal.
But Attorney General Pam Bondi, complete with rectoplasm on her face, basically indicts and jails anyone who asks just what the hell is happening here. Because confusion is useful to a certain sort of political operator. And sorry to get pretty heavy pretty quickly, but there's no way of getting around it. There's a famous chapter in Hitler's Mein Kampf on the big lie, which essentially says that you got to make the lie as large and unbelievable as possible and repeat it as much as possible for what Hitler and those sorts of con men tacticians are trying to make work. It's the utter contempt of the people they're lying to, but it's their political tactic. And it's also a loyalty test for who is with you and who binds themselves to you and who's against you. It kind of breaks the minds of the people who are against you because they try to square the absolute ridiculousness of this, who will continue to try to argue the facts against this bald-faced lie and miss the point entirely and almost politically neutralise themselves. That's kind of the political logic and philosophy that's going on here. But South Park knows this tactic, and it knows that it can kind of neutralise the big lie and render it absurd by pointing it out in the stupidest ways possible. What South Park also points out that is different about what we're dealing with now is that there are a whole lot of new technologies that enable this, that there is a brain rot culture that these technologies enable that adds to this confusion, and things like AI deepfakes that make everything passably plausible. It's a bunch of powerful and toxic forces. Even Stan gives in. In the most meta moment of the series, and out of desperation, he creates a Facebook page that tells truth to power, that just comes out and says it.
How many weeks has it been now dealing with one stupid thing after another? The truth is, I think a lot of people are just afraid to admit that South Park sucks now.
The problem is, this proves to be an incredibly popular complaint, just about me complaining about it infiltrating my watch channels. And South Park definitely illustrates how a popular outpouring, basically a grassroots pop culture, if you will, quickly gets captured and then monetized. Yep. Stan succumbs and launches his own meme coin because his situation is dire and everyone else is profiting, and this is just the world we live in, right? So what are you going to do? And if this plotline played out even further, I think we'd probably also see a compromised Stan turn it into a political platform as well, so he can accrue power and profit at the same time. In short, the diagnosis is that this sort of meeting of culture, politics, and money is a grift, and not a particularly new one. After all, a certain wannabe dictator who spelled it out while he was in prison and later became one to lethal effect pointed it out. Hannah Arendt diagnosed the philosophy in her own work, and now some practice the con openly. In short, it's just corruption. But corruption that has been made uniquely potent in this moment through the weakness of democratic institutions, the ruthless ambition of our technologies, and the brokenness of our culture. And although South Park used to cry that,
Uh-oh, Simpsons did it! Simpsons did it!
actually in this moment, it's South Park who did it and diagnosed it, who most incisively pointed out the naked corruption of the emperor with no clothes. But how did they do it? And why does it work so well? Well, power wants to be taken seriously. It wants you to fear and to respect it. And those who wield it want to be seen as like gods on Mount Olympus, unimpeachable. Not perhaps morally, but politically. In short, you shouldn't be able to question it. But South Park shows that these men and women who would be gods are the most basic thing we can be. People with bodies and gross habits. And everyone looks stupid. That's the joke. But the stupidity works. In an attention economy, being a clown itself is actually tactically useful because the outrage keeps their supporters hooked, while the confusion makes accountability almost impossible, which is exactly what this season of South Park captures and illustrates. For these people, every scandal becomes an opportunity to fundraise and to profit. However, the stupidity, that's also their weakness, because stupid is very defeatable. And here's why that matters philosophically. Because South Park has stumbled into one of satire's oldest traditions, the tradition of the court jester. The medieval jesters had one job, to make people laugh, but they often had another covert assignment too, to tell truth to power under the cover of laughter, because it can't be taken seriously, it's literally a joke, and yet the insight that must not be given words is said, and it's heard in the presence of the king, no less. Henry VIII's jester, Will Summers, used to call him fat and riddled with gout, teasing the monarch about his overeating, his overspending, and his womanizing to boot, and mostly getting away with it. In one form or another, it's a very ancient practice of speech that philosophers call parrhesia, dangerous or courageous speech. But the twist here is that it's being armoured with humour, making it even more effective. George Bernard Shaw once allegedly said that if you want to tell people the truth, you better make them laugh or they'll kill you. Now that's an internet quote, so he might not have actually said it, but I like it. And the hope is that you can't execute the fool for calling you fat if everyone is already laughing about it. And good luck getting that $3 billion back too. Playwrights like Aristophanes did this in ancient Greece, writing comic plays mocking famous figures in a time where politicians had their critics tried and executed. Juvenal did it in Rome, describing senators as worse than the prostitutes they condemned. We've mentioned jesters, and there's a long line of satirist philosophers like Francois Rabelais, Voltaire, Voltaire and Jonathan Swift too. In the 1940s, Chaplin turned Hitler into a balloon-popping buffoon in The Great Dictator, with the Marx Brothers, who made fun of every class and every human foible imaginable in their own long careers. And I think they all understood the same thing. Power wants dignity and respect. It needs you to take it seriously, and the fastest way to undermine that power is to make it impossible to take seriously. So that's what South Park does. To drive this home, South Park drags everything into the obscene. Trump's tiny penis impregnating Satan through a pinhole butthole isn't just for the shock value, no, it's got plenty of that. It's also showing how pathetically needy these world historical figures are. Peter Thiel gets a serious hearing because he got lucky in a credit card company, but he's portrayed as a gullible idiot, confused by 6'7".
6'7".
And really just fitting any random scrap into his crazy theory of the Antichrist. He's a needy man desperate for attention, like all of South Park's targets, and that's what they nail too. The scatological humour also has a long tradition too. Back to, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, for example, which is full of fart jokes, and even back to the ancient Romans and Greeks and beyond. Mikhail Bakhtin, a famous scholar of Dostoevsky and other texts, calls it the carnivalesque, where medieval carnivals made kings and peasants equally gross to level hierarchies. South Park also does this by taking stupid at its word. Because if every crisis is an apocalypse, then South Park builds into the narrative the apocalypse. If someone is an arse licker, then South Park makes that a reality too. The critique is of how far some people will go to debase themselves for just some tiny scraps of power, and the feces on the face makes visible just how little power and just how much humiliation that involves. And it performs a useful function. It makes the deal a whole lot less tempting for the rest of us to take when it's made so visible. And I keep thinking of that great line from Game of Thrones where Littlefinger says, "Chaos is a ladder," because it seems to perfectly capture the grift that some people are trying to apply here. The confusion isn't random. Instead, it's kind of structural. It's a feature, not a bug, to put it another way, of the system itself. Here, the corruption isn't hidden. It's being performed. Everybody knows it's gross. Nobody cares as long as they're getting paid. When we add AI to this and evidence stops mattering entirely, any damaging video is obviously fake, while any flattering one is definitely real. The powerful in this, they don't need to be innocent, they just need to have plausible deniability about everything. And oh boy, is that something South Park gets too, and doesn't let them get away with. Because what's striking for me is just how boring all of these villains are. Funny, sure, when South Park portrays them, but just basic. Like, this isn't your House of Cards with its genius manipulators. It's a bunch of anxious, hollow people protecting their income streams. They give Trump gifts. They fund his ballroom. They trade on inside information. They throw each other under the bus the second trouble appears. The portrait here, I think, is great because it isn't of evil masterminds. It's just of mediocre grifters who've realised that the system rewards a certain kind of shamelessness and compliance. And if you believe that some form of collapse is unavoidable, be it democratic or climatic or biblical or otherwise, then the only rational move is to grab what you can and run. And I keep getting the feeling that the show is nudging us towards a hidden question under all of this diagnosis, which is, if this is what keeps winning the day, stuff this stupid, then what kind of system are we living in? Which I think leads us into a kind of trap, which sometimes South Park evades and sometimes it doesn't. Sure, South Park is absolutely brilliant at showing us how stupid and corrupt politics is, but it also runs the risk of making us feel like there's nothing worth doing about it. In short, it can encourage cynicism, the very political attitude that let these grifters and con artists rise in the first place. And it risks becoming a permanent state, a philosophical one that we call nihilism. So let's look at that risk of cynicism and nihilism and what South Park does to try and avoid those traps, because it does try. And I think the show has been rightly accused over the years of using the same move over and over again. And it's the everyone's an idiot move. I like to think of it as kind of a Joe Rogan position because it allows you to be funny and agreeable and find something to like in everyone you talk to without really committing to positions of your own or having to defend them or have to real stand for something. South Park can be kind of a moving target with no real values, even as it critiques those of others. But that is kind of the dark beating heart of cynicism. It's useful as a critique, absolutely it is, but it can also calcify into the classic nothing matters and everything is meaningless position, basically nihilism. And that comes from criticising everything else while adopting no position of your own to prevent yourself falling afoul of those same criticisms. Another version of this is the classic just asking questions move. Allowing somebody to raise anything as a thought without committing to defending it. And sometimes, to be honest, South Park has done a little bit of that too. Now, on the one hand, this might look like integrity. Refusing to pick a side absolutely keeps the satire from becoming stale or becoming propaganda. Diogenes of Sinope, for example, the original ancient Greek cynic, was an equal opportunity offender. He would sit in his barrel all day and he would heckle anybody who came by. It didn't matter who they were or what they believed in. It's also understandably, genuinely how many people feel, not passionate about any side, just exhausted by all of it. But it also flattens everything, making it all equivalent and removing any foundation for judgment. It makes it a game of tit for tat or left versus right or, well, what about this, what about that? And I think the problem with that is that some things are objectively ethically worse than others, and some principles do matters, and lives and livelihoods can be at stake. Those people matter, and they don't have the luxury of cynicism and nihilism. And South Park's equal opportunity offence sometimes tended to trend that way, and it couldn't really stand up and meet the moment at points. If critics spend all of their time and all of their energy mocking everybody equally, then they've essentially neutralised themselves and flattened the targets of their critique. Because you don't need to silence dissent when dissent has already decided that nothing matters. And it can play into the hands of the powerful when it does, because they don't need our support, they just need our resignation, our expression of, oh well, nothing matters. But in its defence, South Park often recognises when it's fallen into this trap. When they brought back Man Bear Pig as an unstoppable killer after years of climate denial jokes, that was kind of them admitting, oh holy crap, our both sides are dumb stance accidentally aided the wrong side. But I do get that the gravitational pull towards ironic detachment in comedy is strong, and it's kind of an occupational hazard. The show can diagnose what's wrong with surgical precision, and it can mock power brilliantly, but it almost never says what you should actually do about that, because that would require sincerity. And sincerity in South Park's universe is ultimately seen as a bit of a vulnerability. And that's where I think the trap lives. But here's the counter-argument to that. That's not actually South Park's fault. That's our fault. It's just showing us what these tides are unintentionally shaping us into. South Park works because we pretty much have a tendency to fall into that trap and that cynicism and give up. Like, we laugh at Randy Marsh because we recognise ourselves, people who sometimes know better but do nothing, who are captives to our fleeting whims and enthusiasms. We laugh at the town's endless cycle of panic and amnesia because that's literally how we process the news now. It's almost a survival mechanism. There's crisis, then outrage, then memes, then forget, then we repeat. The show isn't making us cynical. Perhaps it's showing us part of what we already are. And that, I think, is a pretty strong defence and a vote actually in its favour. Because if the show's job is to remind us that the powerful, after all, are just basic grasping people, then it's also helpful to remind us of what we are too. Tired and a bit cynical and ready to give in. It's like when a good friend calls you on your crap and you say, yeah, you're right, and I don't want to be like that. Cynicism and nihilism, they're always a risk. They're always an option. And ones that we don't often choose, but resign ourselves to. But by calling it out, South Park reminds us that we can be better. But after pointing that out, what comes next? Parrhesia. That's what comes next. Speaking truth to power. And sorry, yes, it's yet another Michel Foucault reference yet again, but some of his later work was concerned exactly with this. How this kind of honesty and radical speech is important and should be put out there. It's why I've gone on this little bit of a tear, to be honest. And although South Park might not quote Foucault exactly, fearless speech really does seem to be its organising principle. Not just the right to free speech, but actually using it. even when there's much more money in not using it. Take the Trump micropenis saga, and again, Google at your own risk. The show gave his tiny erect penis googly eyes and made it a speaking character. When Comedy Central wanted to blur it, Parker and Stone argued that since it had eyes and a personality, it counted as a character and couldn't be censored. That argument went to Paramount's board, to Shari Redstone herself, and they aired the micropenis. Sure, it's juvenile, but it's also a sitting president depicted as sexually pathetic, literally in bed with Satan, at a moment when that man controls the Justice Department. They knew the backlash was coming. White House statements, threats, the whole circus. But they did it anyway. And this isn't new. For 27 years, they prodded untouchable topics. Scientology, Muhammad, China, climate denial, school shootings, Ozempic. They've been banned, threatened, censored. That's the job. The same one Aristophanes did in Athens, mocking generals and demagogues so viciously that Plato blamed him for turning Athens against Socrates. Yet another thing Plato got wrong. The point isn't that they're right. It's that they insist on saying rude, uncomfortable things about people who are used to reverence. In a world of managed speech and carefully lawyered statements, that shamelessness keeps open a space where power can be laughed at instead of only feared. And one of the maybe not so quiet heroes of South Park this season has been, of all people, Kyle's mom, Sheila Broflovsky. Because in episode 5 of the 27th season, South Park tackles the dreaded topic of Gaza. Now, you no doubt have thoughts on this, as do I, but let's focus on what Sheila does rather than what everybody wants to fight about, just for a minute. Because throughout the episode, everybody is watching her closely and betting on her to see what she does. They know that the conflict has pitted her Jewish identity against what she obviously feels about the actions of the Netanyahu government, and at a certain point, she snaps.
I'm going to find out where all this is coming from, and I'm going to give them a piece of my mind!
And I've got to be honest, my heart sank at that moment. Not because of what happened, but because of my worry about how this plotline was going to land in the episode. What joke was South Park going to make about something that, at the bottom of it, isn't funny? But it happens that, well, that's why they're the masters and I'm an essayist on YouTube. Because Sheila does this.
You are not going to talk to me like that! There you are, Mr. Netanyahu! Just who do you think you are? Killing thousands and flattening neighborhoods, then wrapping yourself in Judaism like it's some shield from criticism. You're making life for Jews miserable and life for American Jews impossible. You know what you're doing, and you're doing it on purpose. Well, now you can just sit in that chair, because I'm not going anywhere, Buster. I've been to every PT.
And it's perfect. She uses the tools she has at her disposal, her voice, and the accumulated millennia of disappointed Jewish mothers to take down exactly the right target, and again to speak truth to power in whatever way she can. It's a great model, one we can learn from and one we can gain strength from. And let's not gloss over a philosophically nerdy point about what South Park is doing here. It doesn't just make people angry, it also makes them think differently. Because satire works as an epistemic tool. You exaggerate positions until the hidden assumptions become visible and the arguments become ridiculous. When Peter Thiel delivers his Antichrist PowerPoint connecting TikTok memes to Revelation to Trump's penis, it's absurd. But it's also the perfect diagram of how tech billionaires retrofit grand metaphysics onto whatever justifies their next move and their dumb ideologies that they cling to for personal or self-interested reasons. Now, most philosophers and political theorists take forever to theorize about this stuff and finally put it out there, years after the crisis, and carefully footnoted. But I admire what South Park has done. It broadcasts its own theory within 6 days of the events happening, even at the risk of getting it wildly wrong, and making fun of themselves when they do. I think if we watch these episodes in 5 years' time, we'll see all of our confusion and our outrage and everything else preserved in amber. The half-baked theories, the panic, the desperate meme grabbing to just make sense of the senselessness. It may not be how philosophy is usually done, but I do think that there is something valuable in it. It's like a kind of phenomenology or lived experience. It captures everything before it calcifies into history and gets slightly rewritten or forgotten. And secretly, South Park kind of does care. too. Sometimes it can't help giving that, here's a thing I learned today speech at the end of the episode. Sometimes it undercuts it with a joke because, we can't show how we truly feel, right? But sometimes it doesn't. It reminds me a lot of Jerry Springer's Final Thoughts. And no matter what you thought of that show, and it was an abomination, in my opinion, I always felt a bit sorry for how this super smart and super politically savvy Springer had to earn a living. You could see it on his face too. But those final thoughts of his, well, a lot of them are pretty good and pretty meaningful and actually a pretty decent way to live. South Park's deepest contradiction is that it kind of can't follow its own advice. It can't actually stop caring. After decades of insisting that nothing matters, it keeps manning those barricades, it keeps throwing stones at giants, and it keeps pushing that boulder up that mountain. So where does all of this leave us? Well, here's what I think we can take from South Park's accidental philosophy. Politics is really stupid, sure, but it's also the only game that determines whether people literally live or die, whether the planet burns, whether democracy survives, whether we help others. Those aren't contradictions. They're just the conditions of politics that we're stuck with. And the people we have to be really wary of are the ones who tell us that this is just how the world is, or how things have to go, or that there is nothing to do but to make our own nut and to keep our heads down. Because none of this is inevitable. It's all historically contingent. It's all a choice every day to keep things as they are or to change them. Maybe that choice is not easy. Maybe it's not instant. Maybe it takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work. But it is a choice nonetheless. And the answer, as South Park shows, isn't to transcend the stupidity or to surrender to it. It's to see it clearly. Every grotesque, ridiculous, rectoplasm-covered bit of it. And then make our choices anyway. Vote while knowing that politics can be spun into performance or that it might not work. Protest while knowing that protests are content and can frequently fail. Care when knowing that caring makes you vulnerable and that it won't solve everything. South Park nailed politics this year, not by solving it, but by showing us exactly how ridiculous it is while refusing to stop watching and stop telling and stop asking us to do something about it. And that's their job. Court jesters don't build better kingdoms. They just make sure that nobody forgets how chaotic the current one is. Our job is different. We have to live in the kingdom they're mocking. We have to build something better from the ruins of what they're laughing at. And maybe, just maybe, we also need that laughter to stay sane enough to keep trying. But that's it for Philosophical TV Club. If you've enjoyed it, please remember to like, hype and subscribe. It really does help. And until next time, be wise and be kind and
take care of yourself and each other.